Imagine standing in a room. Someone walks up to you, looks you dead in the eye, and shoves you to the floor. You are bruised. You are bleeding. You look up, waiting for the apology, waiting for the panic in their eyes, waiting for any sign of human empathy. Instead, they turn around, pour themselves a cup of coffee, and ask you if you think it's going to rain today. It is a psychological throat punch. In that single quiet moment, something inside you breaks. But it isn't just the pain of the wound that hurts. It is the agonizing, dizzying vertigo of their complete and utter indifference. Your brain goes into overdrive. It loops the same exhausting questions at 3 a.m. How can they sleep? Are they a monster? Did I deserve this? Did they ever actually care about me at all? When someone breaks you and then acts like they just handed you a glass of water, it does something terrifying to the human psyche. It makes you question your own sanity. It makes you feel invisible. And here is the trap we all fall into. We try to decode their behavior using our operating system. We think, well, if I did that to someone, I would be sick to my stomach. I wouldn't be able to eat. I would be begging for forgiveness. So why are they smiling? We wait. We wait for the confession. We wait for the tears. We wait for the moment of clarity where they finally realize what they did. And while we wait, we remain completely chained to the basement of their approval. We let them hold the keys to our emotional freedom, hoping that one day they will turn the lock. They won't. And today, we are going to talk about exactly why they are physically, biologically, and psychologically incapable of doing so. But I need to give you a warning before we begin. The explanation I'm about to give you is not comforting. It is not a gentle, warm hug designed to make you feel like everything is going to be okay. It is a cold, clinical look behind the curtain of human manipulation, shame, and self-preservation. It is going to force you to look at human nature with absolute, unfiltered clarity. If you choose to stop reading or listening right now, you can keep hoping. You can keep playing the tape in your head, waiting for that magical day when they finally validate your pain. You can stay in the loop. But if you stay with me for the next few minutes, I am going to give you the exact behavioral blueprints of what is actually happening inside their mind. I'm going to show you the hidden mechanisms of cognitive denial, the terror of toxic shame, and the quiet, manipulative chess game they are playing, even if they aren't consciously aware of it. Once you understand this blueprint, the spell is broken. You will never look at their indifference the same way again, and more importantly, you will finally have the tools to take your mind back. Let's begin. Look at the person who hurt you. When you watch them walk through life with zero weight on their shoulders, it looks like absolute strength, doesn't it? It looks like supreme confidence. It feels like they have this incredible dark superpower to just switch off their humanity and move on, while you are left picking up the shattered glass of your own life. But as a behaviorist, I need to tell you a fundamental truth about human beings. What looks like supreme confidence is almost always a desperate, frantic scramble for psychological survival. There are 3 primary reasons why they act like nothing happened, and none of them have to do with you. In any human interaction, there is a concept called the frame. The frame is the dominant reality of the situation. When someone hurts you, they create a fracture in the relationship. If they acknowledge that fracture, they have to step into your frame, a reality where they are the perpetrator, they are wrong, and they owe you something. That is a low-power position. By acting completely normal, by asking you about your day or bringing up mundane topics, they are attempting to assert their frame. They are testing you. They are throwing a psychological anchor into the ground and waiting to see if you will pull yourself toward it. When they act like nothing is wrong, they are silently communicating, "This is the reality I have chosen to live in. If you want to interact with me, you must step into this reality too, where nothing happened." It is a silent, subconscious demand for submission. The human brain cannot tolerate holding two conflicting beliefs at the same time. It causes a visceral, painful psychological distress known as cognitive dissonance. Most people, even highly toxic, hurtful people, have a deeply ingrained belief that they are the good guy in their own movie. They need to believe they are fair, kind, and justified. Now look at the math. Belief A, I am a good, decent person. Belief B, I just terribly, unfairly devastated someone who cared about me. These two ideas cannot coexist in the same skull without causing massive psychological agony. So how does their brain solve the math problem? It edits the script. To protect their ego, their brain will literally rewrite the memory of the event. They tell themselves stories. It wasn't that bad. They are just overreacting. They drove me to do it. Or, they deserved it because of how they treated me 3 years ago. By the time they face you the next day, their brain has fully digested the lie. They aren't acting like nothing happened. In their highly distorted, self-protective version of reality, nothing significant actually did happen. They have sanitized their own conscience. We often confuse guilt with shame, but they are two completely different chemical and psychological engines. Guilt is pro-social. It says, I did a bad thing. It drives us to apologize, to sweat, to make things right. Shame is ego-threatening. It says, I am a bad person. When a person lacks the emotional maturity or the psychological strength to handle shame, their nervous system treats it like an existential threat. If they admit to themselves, even for a second, the depth of the pain they caused you, the floodgates of shame would open and completely drown their fragile identity. So they don't look. They build a wall. Their indifference, their casual attitude, their laughter. It isn't peace. It is armor. It is a psychological shield built to keep their own self-hatred and shame from breaching the walls. They act like nothing happened because looking at what actually happened would require an emotional courage they simply do not possess. So what do you do with this? Most people spend months, years, or even decades trying to force the other person to see the truth. They yell, they cry, they present evidence, they draft long text messages explaining how much they hurt. You need to stop. Every time you try to force them to see your pain, you are trying to force a computer to run a software program it doesn't have the hardware to support. They do not have the emotional processors required to hold your pain, feel genuine remorse, and maintain their fragile ego at the same time. They will always choose their ego. Always. Your healing cannot be a hostage to their confession. The moment you realize that their indifference is not a reflection of your worth, but a reflection of their profound emotional cowardice, the game changes. You stop waiting for the apology. You stop arguing about what happened. You reclaim your frame. You accept the apology you are never going to get. You close the book, and you walk out of their distorted theater. The ultimate power is not making them realize they hurt you. The ultimate power is making them realize that their ability to affect your peace of mind has officially expired. To truly understand the psychological machinery of a person who hurts you and then glibly asks what you want for dinner, you have to look past the surface layer of their behavior. When we witness this level of coldness, our immediate instinct is to label them as a sociopath or a monster. It is a comforting label because it distances us from them. It makes them an anomaly, but the reality is far more subtle, far more common, and ultimately much more manipulative. What you are witnessing is a highly calculated, often subconscious, deployment of frame control designed specifically to maintain an illusion of power. In the study of human behavior, every interaction is governed by an unspoken set of rules called the frame. The frame is simply the dominant reality of the situation. It is the agreed-upon truth of what is happening between two people. When someone inflicts harm upon you, whether through a betrayal, a cruel comment, or a calculated lie, they create a violent fracture in the relationship. By all laws of human decency and social contracts, that fracture establishes a very specific frame. They are the perpetrator, you are the victim. They have incurred a moral debt, and they must now do the emotional work to pay it back. But stepping into that frame is a massive threat to their ego. To acknowledge that they hurt you means they have to surrender their high-status position. It requires them to step down from their pedestal, look up at you from a place of vulnerability, and say, "I messed up, and I am at your mercy for forgiveness." For a person obsessed with control, that vulnerability feels like psychological death. It is a low-power position they refuse to occupy. So instead of entering your frame, they execute a silent pivot. They act completely normal. They bring up trivial topics, make casual jokes, or ask you a mundane question. This is not casual behavior. It is a direct, aggressive bid for frame dominance. By behaving as if nothing happened, they are throwing a psychological anchor into the ground and waiting to see if you will pull yourself toward it. They are presenting an alternative reality where the injury never occurred, and they are silently daring you to challenge it. This creates a terrifying double bind for you. If you accept their casual conversation, you are silently agreeing to their frame. You are validating their reality that nothing is wrong, which means you must swallow your own pain and pretend your bruises don't exist. But if you try to bring up the hurt, if you try to pull them back to the reality of what they did, they instantly flip the script. They will look at you with sighing exhaustion and accuse you of being dramatic, sensitive, or unable to let things go. By acting unaffected, they shift the burden of proof onto you. You are forced to become the prosecutor in a trial they refuse to attend. They sit back as the calm, rational observer, while you are left looking like the irrational, emotional disruptor of peace. This is the illusion of power in its purest form. They didn't actually win anything, and they aren't actually stronger than you. They have simply hijacked the psychological boundaries of the interaction to force you into a corner where your only choices are silent submission or exhausted frustration. They keep their hands clean by forcing you to dirty yours just to get them to acknowledge the truth. To truly understand how someone can look you in the eye after devastating you and act as though the slate is completely clean, you have to peer into the deep, frantic machinery of the human brain trying to protect itself. When we are deeply hurt by someone we care about, we naturally expect them to feel a corresponding level of internal friction. We assume their conscience is keeping them awake at night, tossing and turning under the weight of what they did. But this assumption relies on a fatal flaw. We assume their brain is processing the event the same way ours is. The reality is that their mind is actively engaging in a violent psychological survival tactic to resolve a state of agony known as cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the intense, visceral distress that occurs when a person holds two fundamentally contradictory beliefs or values at the exact same time. The human brain is biologically wired to despise this state of tension. It treats dissonance as an actual physical threat to its survival and will deploy any psychological defense necessary to eliminate it. In this scenario, the perpetrator's mind is confronted with two violently clashing ideas. Belief A is their foundational self-concept. I am a good, decent, and reasonable person. Belief B is the reality of their recent behavior. I just did something incredibly cruel, selfish, or deceptive that deeply shattered someone else. These two thoughts cannot live in the same space. If they accept both as true, their entire self-image collapses, and they are forced to view themselves as a villain. To prevent this ego death, their brain immediately goes to work like a corrupt defense attorney, twisting the facts and editing the script of what actually happened. They do not sit down and consciously plot how to lie to you. Instead, their subconscious mind automatically rewrites the narrative in real time to bridge the gap. They begin to construct rationalizations that sanitize their actions. They tell themselves that you are overreacting, that you have always been too sensitive, or that your past behavior somehow provoked and justified their response. Over an incredibly short period of time, this psychological editing process becomes absolute truth to them. By the time they face you the next day, they aren't merely pretending that nothing happened. They have successfully convinced their own neural pathways that the event was either wildly exaggerated or entirely justified. Their brain has successfully solved the math equation of cognitive dissonance by deleting your pain from the formula entirely. They look at you with total calmness because, in the sanitized, rewritten version of reality that their brain created to protect their ego, they did nothing wrong. You are left holding the agonizing weight of a betrayal that, in their mind, has been completely erased from the ledger of reality. To accurately diagnose the chilling indifference of someone who burns your world down and then casually steps over the ashes, you have to understand the invisible, toxic emotional engine running beneath their surface. When we are wounded by another person, we naturally look for signs of remorse. We look for a slumped posture, a downward glance, a crack in their voice, anything that signals they feel bad about what they did. When we see none of those things, we assume they feel absolutely nothing. But human behavior is rarely that simple. What looks like a total vacuum of emotion is very often a dense, impenetrable fortress designed to hide a specific, deeply primitive psychological force: toxic shame. To understand why they act like nothing happened, you must first understand the massive, irreconcilable difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is an incredibly healthy, pro-social emotion. Guilt focuses on behavior. It says, "I did a bad thing." Because guilt isolates the action from the identity, a person experiencing guilt can afford to look at what they did, confess, feel remorse, and actively work to repair the damage. Shame, however, is an entirely different beast. Shame does not focus on the action, it attacks the identity. Shame says, "I am a bad person." When an individual lacks emotional maturity and psychological resilience, their ego cannot survive a confrontation with true shame. To look at your tear-stained face, to acknowledge the deep, bleeding psychological wounds they inflicted upon you, would require them to admit that they are capable of monstrous behavior. For a fragile identity, that admission feels like absolute destruction. Their nervous system perceives that sudden drop in self-worth as an existential threat, a literal life-or-death crisis for the ego. To prevent this internal collapse, their psychological defense mechanisms instantly trigger a state of total lockdown. They cannot process the shame, so they bury it deep beneath an impenetrable armor of indifference. Their casual demeanor, their easy smile, and their total lack of acknowledgement are not signs of peace or cold calculations of a criminal mastermind. They are a desperate, frantic, psychological numbing agent. They act like nothing happened because looking at what actually happened would force them to look into a mirror that reflects a version of themselves they are utterly terrified to see. This creates a tragic paradox in your interactions with them. You approach them assuming that if you can just explain your pain clearly enough, if you can just make them see how much they hurt you, they will finally understand and apologize. But what you don't realize is that the more vividly you describe your pain, the higher you raise the stakes of their shame. The more broken you appear, the more terrifyingly bad they become in the reflection of your eyes. Your pursuit of an apology inadvertently forces them to tighten their armor. Their indifference is a violent, defensive rejection of reality, a psychological wall built so high that your pain cannot breach it. Because if it did, the overwhelming flood of their own self-hatred would completely consume them. When you are dealing with a person who inflicts deep emotional damage and then effortlessly transitions back into normal, casual conversation, you are not just witnessing a lack of empathy. You are participating in a highly sophisticated, unspoken social trap known in behavioral psychology as a double bind. This is a game of interpersonal chess where every single move you make has been mathematically pre-compromised by their refusal to acknowledge reality. By acting as if everything is completely fine, they create a highly pressurized social environment that forces you to choose between two equally destructive options, ensuring that no matter what you do, they remain completely insulated from accountability. To understand this trap, you have to look at the social physics of the situation. When they act perfectly normal, they are establishing a baseline of peace, however artificial it may be. They have unilaterally decided that the slate is clean. This places the entire burden of conflict initiation directly onto your shoulders. If you choose the first option, which is to stay quiet, go along with their casual conversation, and pretend nothing is wrong, you are forced to swallow your own reality. You have to actively participate in the erasure of your own pain. This is incredibly damaging to your psyche because it teaches your brain that your boundaries do not matter, and it gives them the green light to repeat the hurtful behavior in the future, knowing you will eventually comply with the silence. But if you choose the second option, to stand up for yourself, reject their artificial peace, and demand to talk about what they did, they instantly exploit the social dynamics to make you look like the aggressor. Because they are acting so calm, reasonable, and polite, your attempt to bring up the injury makes you look like the one who is bringing negativity, drama, and conflict into the room. They will look at your visible pain, your shaking voice, or your anger, and they will use it to paint you as erratic, overly sensitive, or completely incapable of letting things go. They will say things like, "I was just trying to have a nice day, and you have to bring this up again." Or, "Why do you always have to ruin the mood?" This is the psychological masterstroke of the double bind. They commit the original offense in private, but they defend themselves by using the public or social expectation of harmony as a weapon against you. They leverage your natural desire for peace, your fear of being seen as difficult, and your wish to avoid conflict to silence your grievances before you can even articulate them. You are left in a state of agonizing paralysis, realizing that to speak the truth is to be labeled the villain, and to stay silent is to abandon yourself. They have successfully shifted the entire focus of the relationship away from their abusive or hurtful behavior and onto your emotional reaction to it, forcing you to police your own behavior while they walk away entirely unchecked. To break free from this relentless psychological trap, you have to execute a complete and radical shift in your strategic objective. For as long as you have been hurting, your primary objective has likely been to secure a confession. You want them to look you in the eye, feel the weight of what they did, and finally offer you a genuine, validating apology. You believe that this apology is the key that will unlock your emotional cage. But from a behavioral standpoint, this is the ultimate tactical error. By making your healing contingent on their confession, you are voluntarily giving them complete and absolute control over your psychological well-being. You are handing the keys of your emotional freedom to the very person who locked you in the dark, hoping that they will suddenly develop the moral compass to set you free. They won't. And as we have established, they physically and neurologically cannot. When you understand the baseline biology of their defense mechanisms, their inability to handle toxic shame, and their brain's desperate need to rewrite reality to avoid cognitive dissonance, you realize that waiting for an apology from them is like standing in front of a vending machine, pressing the button for water, and getting angry when it doesn't dispense a warm cup of coffee. The machine simply does not have the internal hardware to produce what you are asking for. It is not a matter of them refusing to give it to you. They literally do not possess the psychological components required to generate genuine, unprompted remorse without their ego collapsing. To continue demanding a confession from an emotionally bankrupt system is an exercise in self-sabotage. True power, therefore, does not lie in winning the argument or forcing them to see the light. True power lies in refusing to step onto their playing field entirely. You must reject their invitation to enter their distorted psychological sandbox. When they act as though nothing happened and you react with anger, pleading, or passive-aggressive silence, you are still actively participating in their game. You are confirming to them that they still hold the remote control to your nervous system. To reclaim your frame, you must become entirely detached from their response. This is not about putting on a fake, cold mask of indifference. It is about reaching a state of clinical clarity where you recognize their behavior for exactly what it is, a desperate survival tactic of a fragile ego. When you stop expecting them to act like a psychologically healthy, mature adult, their power over you instantly evaporates. You stop arguing about what happened. You stop explaining your pain to someone who is actively committed to not understanding it. You accept the apology you are never going to receive, not because they earned it, but because your peace of mind is far too valuable to leave in their hands. You unilaterally close the ledger. By reclaiming your own frame, you establish your own truth, validate your own pain, and walk away from their theater. You realize that the ultimate countermeasure to their manipulation is not a clever psychological move or a devastating comeback. It is your complete, unshakable indifference to their version of reality. You simply step out of the courtroom, leave them to argue with an empty room, and realize that your survival was never theirs to dictate.